The war in the Middle East escalating and the horrors are devastating. Day 4, death toll on both sides approaching the thousands, with at least 11 Americans among the dead and American nationals among the hostages. Israel promising a total siege of Gaza, but Hamas threatening to execute Israeli hostages in retaliation for every bomb blast without warning. Is there any way this ends without more violence and bloodshed? Is a diplomatic solution off the table? Joining us now to discuss is Professor Waxman, Chair of Israeli Studies at UCLA and the Director of the UCLA Y&S Nazarian Center for Israel Studies. Good morning, Professor. Welcome back, and thank you. The barbaric nature of these terrorist crimes against civilians and the military, even Israelis are calling them unprecedented. Can you put into context what we are seeing on day 4?
Well, I think what we're seeing is the beginning of a war between Israel and Hamas, unlike any of the previous rounds of fighting between the two sides. They've fought since Hamas took over the Gaza Strip in 2007. They fought 4 mini wars. Now, those wars were very destructive for the Gaza Strip. Around 4,000 Palestinians were killed in them. But I think the war that is unfolding now is going to be bigger, longer, and even more destructive and deadly than any of those previous rounds of fighting. Israel, I think, in the next 24 to 48 hours is likely to launch a ground invasion of the Gaza Strip. And so we're going to see, intense street fighting. Gaza is densely packed, of course, so it's going to put a very large number of Palestinian civilians at risk, as well as Israeli soldiers, because there's much greater danger for the Israeli military of going into Gaza on the ground than just carrying out the kind of airstrikes that it's been doing in recent days.
Right. And Professor, I do want to ask you, we have some news outlets reporting that rockets are being fired now from Lebanon into Israel, and Israel retaliating with artillery. What does that tell you?
Well, it's an indication of how fragile the situation is on Israel's northern border. There's been sporadic rocket fire over the last couple of days. There was an attempt by armed militants, presumed to be Palestinian militants, to enter Israel yesterday. So the situation with Hezbollah, which controls southern Lebanon, is very, very delicate. And there's a real potential for escalation and for Hezbollah to get fully involved in this war, which would take it onto a whole new level in terms of the severity of this conflict.
Right. And so many people are asking, how can something like this happen there? I mean, obviously, we've seen internal conflict within the country. The IDF, an elite intelligence operation revered across the world as the best. How did Israel get so caught off guard?
Well, it is really unfathomable. And I think it's something that's going to be asked and is being asked, and there will be a long time before probably some of the answers emerge. It's clear already that this represents a kind of catastrophic intelligence failure for Israel, a military failure in terms of their readiness for an attack of this magnitude, and the fact that the border was so lightly defended. And also, I think, a political failure in the sense that they really didn't pay as much attention as they should to the threat coming from the Gaza Strip, and they were focusing their attention elsewhere. So there's going to be a very bitter blame game, I expect, in the aftermath of this war, because really it is a really stunning development that Israel, with all its vaunted intelligence capabilities and its military power, was caught so badly off guard, and that this attack was able to continue. I mean, the Hamas terrorists capturing, holding Israeli towns for hours on end before the Israeli army even showed up. And then Hamas being able to take its hostages across the border quite freely is really mind-boggling. And I think there's going to be a lot of questions asked as to how that could happen and whose responsibility it is.
This is all coming as the U.S. and Saudi Arabia were very close to making a deal to create more protections in the region. Do you think that had anything to do with the timing of this war?
I do. I think the timing, at least, is partly related to that. As those diplomatic efforts seem to be making progress, the possibility of a deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia began to seem like a real prospect. I think both Hamas and its patron Iran saw that as a threat to their interests. And so derailing that diplomatic effort was, I think, one of Hamas's war aims in this.
And Professor, what is Israel's end game here? You can obliterate Gaza, right? But that doesn't solve the issue with the Palestinians, doesn't it?
That's right. It doesn't even solve the issue with the Gaza Strip, or for that matter with Hamas. So, it's not really clear at this point. The Israeli government and spokespeople have given somewhat different messages as to what Israel's war objective is. Is it to deliver a kind of punishing blow against Hamas and limit its military capabilities, which is similar to its previous objectives in the previous rounds of conflict, or is actually Israel seeking to completely topple Hamas's government and basically carry out regime change in the Gaza Strip? That's unclear. It's not clear whether Israel can achieve those goals. And so I think there's a lot of ambiguity right now as to what exactly this military campaign, though certainly justified, is likely to accomplish.
Is there any nation, the United States, anyone that could potentially negotiate a ceasefire, or is that just completely off the table and unrealistic?
I think at this point, a ceasefire is unrealistic. I think there is a very strong demand in Israel for a very severe retaliation against Hamas. I don't think the Israeli government or the Israeli public would accept a ceasefire at this stage. I think they want to, at a minimum, inflict massive punishment on Hamas. And so I think this war will continue and will escalate and grow in the days to come. But eventually, those diplomatic efforts will kick in and there will be a ceasefire. At a certain point, the question is how long that will take and how many people will die in the meantime.
Right. And right now, as you know, the U.S. does not have a Speaker of the House to approve any aid, and we do not have a U.S. ambassador to Israel. And I know that complicates diplomatic relations there. Professor Dov Waxman, thank you so much for joining us and lending us your vital voice. I have a feeling you'll be back, unfortunately, often. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.